My sister said that I don't belong to our family, and my parents said that she was right. So I left silently. Hello everyone. I had always felt like I didn't fit in with my family. From a young age, I realized that my parents always seemed to have a special relationship with my sister, while I was just the other daughter. It never really bothered me because I knew there wasn't anything I could do about it. But that day when they left for a family vacation, everything changed. I received 15 missed calls from my sister asking for help. At first, I didn't understand why she was calling me so much, but when I finally answered, her rage-filled voice left no room for doubt. "You have no place in our family," my sister said, arms crossed and an arrogant smile on her face, the one I knew all too well. She delivered the line with such feigned sweetness that for a second I almost thought she was trying to help me. But then my mother, sitting at the kitchen table while sipping tea, said, "She's right." My father didn't even look up from his phone and mumbled, "Yeah, maybe it's better that way." For a moment I stood there, looking at the three of them, trying to figure out if they had planned this together. I could practically hear the rehearsals in my sister's room, convincing them, charming them, scheming like she always did. My whole life I'd been the only person who didn't buy her act, and maybe that's why she hated me so much. I laughed not because it was funny but because it was so absurd. "Well," I said, grabbing my jacket from the back of the chair, "I guess I'll save you the trouble." And I walked out. Nobody stopped me. My sister smiled, pleased with herself, and my mother went back to staring at her teacup like she didn't care. My father didn't even look up. I closed the door behind me and took a deep breath. The truth is, it didn't hurt the way they probably wanted it to. I wasn't like my sister, who lived for their approval, always bathing in their praise and performing like the golden child. I had learned a long time ago that I wasn't their favorite. Sure, they tolerated me, but the love and support had always been reserved for her. And honestly, I didn't care. I had my own friends, my own life, and my own sense of who I was. It did sting a little, though. Not the fact that they let me go, but how easy they made it seem. No hesitation. No second-guessing. No "let's talk about this." Just silence. That night, I stayed with my best friend. When I told her what happened, we laughed about it over a bottle of cheap wine, joking about how my sister probably saw herself as the queen of the family now. "Honestly, it seems like you're better off without them," my friend said. And she was right. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this whole thing wasn't just about me. My sister had been setting this up for months, making little comments to my parents about how I didn't fit in, or how I wasn't like them. It wasn't enough for her to be the favorite, she wanted me gone too. 2 days later, they were packing for a family vacation. I hadn't even realized they were planning one until I saw the suitcases by the door. My sister, of course, made a big show of it, laughing loudly as she gave directions and supervised my parents. I watched her from the stairs. She kept glancing at me, waiting for a reaction. When I didn't say anything, she finally turned to me and said, "You're just going to stay here alone? What are you going to do without us?" I smiled, calm and unconcerned, in the way I knew would annoy her the most. "I hope on this trip they take you to a mental hospital. Maybe they have room for Mom and Dad too." Her face turned instantly red. And the next thing I knew, she was screaming, tears, yelling, the whole show. My parents rushed to comfort her, looking at me like I'd just committed a crime. "You're so cruel," my mother said, shaking her head. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" I shrugged. "Because I prefer being sane." When they left, I felt nothing but relief. Finally, the house was quiet, peaceful. For the first time in years, I didn't have to deal with their constant criticism or my sister's endless mind games. I curled up on the couch with a bowl of popcorn and watched my favorite TV shows, relishing the silence. But of course, in a family like mine, peace never lasts. It was 2 days of utter bliss. No yelling, no snide comments, no exhausting power plays. I stayed in the house like it was my own personal retreat, listening to my favorite music, dancing in the kitchen, and catching up on everything I couldn't enjoy when they were around. Then the calls started. The first one came at 10 a.m. I was in the middle of making pancakes when my phone buzzed on the counter. It was my sister. I rolled my eyes and silenced the call. Whatever drama she'd gotten herself into, I didn't want to know. The second call came 5 minutes later. Then the third. By the time I'd finished eating, she'd called 7 times. I stared at my phone, debating whether to block her number. Part of me was curious. What could be so urgent that she couldn't just text? When the 8th call came, I answered, if only to tell her to leave me alone. What? I said, my voice thick with irritation. Finally! She shrieked, her voice shrill and panicked. I've been calling you for hours. Why didn't you answer? Because I don't care, I replied coldly. What do you want? We're in trouble, she said, her voice trembling. I need your help. Define trouble, I replied, leaning back against the counter. She hesitated, which was never a good sign. My sister never hesitated unless she was about to lie. We got mugged. I raised an eyebrow. You got mugged? On your perfect family vacation? Yes, she snapped. Some guy robbed us of all our money. Mom and Dad are freaking out, and we're stuck here with no money. I didn't know who else to call. Now I was intrigued. Why didn't you call Mike? I asked, referring to her husband. Her silence told me everything I needed to know. Oh, I said as a smile spread across my face. You didn't tell him, did you? What happened? Did the guy steal something more than money? Shut up, she hissed, her voice laced with anger. This isn't funny. I laughed. Oh, it's hilarious. Let me guess, you went somewhere you shouldn't have been, and now you're too embarrassed to admit it? I'm close. There was another pause, and then she said, Are you going to help us or not? I thought about it for a moment. On the one hand, this was exactly the kind of mess she deserved. On the other hand, there was something deeply satisfying about seeing her in this situation. Let me think about it, I said. In the meantime, maybe you can ask for help from some of those locals you like to hang out with. I'm sure they'll be more than happy to help you. Oh wait. She started yelling at me, but I hung up before I could hear the rest. For the next few hours, my phone didn't stop ringing with calls and messages, not just from her but from my parents too. They were all variations of the same message. We need your help. Please send money. By the end of the day, I had 15 missed calls and a voicemail from my mother trying to guilt-trip me, saying, I thought you were better than this. We're your family. I couldn't stop laughing. Family? Didn't they tell me I had no place in this family? I sent my sister one text. Sorry, I'm just a roommate, remember? And then I turned my phone off. 2 days after the endless calls, I woke up to a single text message from my sister. It wasn't the wall of emojis or threats I expected. It was simple. We're coming home. Thanks for nothing. I stared at it for a moment, shrugged, and went on with my day. Whatever mess they'd gotten themselves into wasn't my problem. I owed them nothing, especially after what they'd said to me. When they finally returned, I heard the commotion before I saw them. The slamming of car doors, my mother's loud voice yelling about the luggage, and my father muttering under his breath. My sister, of course, made the most dramatic entrance. She stomped into the house, flushed and furious. Her husband, Mike, trailed behind her carrying suitcases. Mike gave me a small nod as he passed in the hallway, like he always did. He was one of the few people in this family I actually respected. Maybe it was because he seemed to see through my sister's bullshit, or maybe it was because deep down he knew I was the sane one. Once everyone was inside, my sister turned to me, her face a mask of rage. You're unbelievable, she spat, pointing a finger at me. We needed you, and you just ignored us. I leaned against the wall and crossed my arms. I'm sorry, I said, although my tone made it clear I wasn't. I didn't know roommates were supposed to pay for each other's vacations. My father glared at me. This isn't a joke, he said. We were stranded in a foreign country. Do you have any idea how humiliating it was to have to ask for help? Humiliating, I repeated, raising an eyebrow. You mean like being told you have no place in your own family? Because I don't know anything about that. My mother let out an exasperated sigh. Why do you always have to be so difficult? We're your family, and families help each other. Oh, now we're family? I said, laughing. How curious. Last week I was just a burden? Or did you forget already? My sister, who'd been pacing the room like a caged animal, finally exploded. You're such a child. Do you even know how much stress you've caused us? Do you even care? I looked her directly in the eye. No. I don't care. And you know why? Because you've never cared about me. Never. All you've ever done is walk all over me. And now you expect me to bail you out? I'm sorry, but I'm done. The room went silent. For once, my sister had no comeback. My mother looked like she wanted to say something, but for the first time, she couldn't find the words. Then Mike, who'd been quietly unpacking by the door, spoke up. She has a point. Everyone turned to stare at him. What? My sister spat, her voice rising. She has a point, he repeated, calmly but firmly. You treat her like garbage and then wonder why she doesn't help you. Maybe if you showed her a little respect, she'd feel differently. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. My sister looked like she'd been slapped. I can't believe you're taking her side, she whispered, her voice thick with fury. I'm not taking sides, he said. I'm just saying you can't treat people like they're nothing, and then expect them to come running when you're in trouble. For the first time in years, I felt like someone finally saw me. But of course the moment didn't last. My dad, ever the mediator, stepped in. Look, we've all been through a lot this week, he said. Let's just put this behind us and try to move on. Sure, I replied, grabbing my bag from the couch. Let's put it all behind us. In fact, let's put it all behind me because I'm done. Done? My mom asked, frowning. I'm leaving, I said. Tonight. Packing my things. My sister rolled her eyes. Please, you've said that before. This time I mean it, I replied. And I'm not coming back. I walked upstairs before they could say anything else, leaving them standing in stunned silence. That night, I called my grandmother, who had always been the only sane person in our family. When I told her what happened, she didn't seem surprised. Come stay with me, she said. You don't need them. And just like that, I was free. The next morning, I walked out of the house without even saying goodbye. My grandmother's house was only an hour away, and I couldn't wait to get there. She lived in a cozy cottage on the edge of a small town. The kind of place where neighbors bring you pies for no reason and everyone knows your name. When I arrived, she greeted me with a warm hug and a plate of cookies, like she always did. You're better off without them, she said, patting my hand. Stay as long as you need. I thought that was the end of it, that I was finally free of my family's chaos and could breathe. But of course it wasn't that simple. 2 days after I moved in, I received a call from an unknown number. At first I ignored it, assuming it was another scam. But when the same number called again, something told me to answer. Hello, I said cautiously. Is this you? A male voice asked. Sounded official, almost too serious. Yes, who's this? This is Detective Ramirez from the county police, he said. We're investigating a complaint involving your family. I felt my stomach drop. What kind of complaint? Your sister filed a complaint against you, he said in a neutral tone. She claims you made threats against her safety before she left for vacation. I'd like to ask you a few questions. For a second I thought I'd misheard him. Threats? I said, laughing in disbelief. Is he serious? She's lying. I understand this may be surprising, he said, his voice calm. But we have to investigate all claims. Can you come down to the station tomorrow morning? I hung up without answering, my mind racing. This was a new level even for my sister. Filing a police report against me? She was going to get me arrested. I told my grandmother what had happened, and she shook her head. That girl has no shame, she said. But don't worry, she has no way to support that lie. We'll sort this out. The next day we went to the police station. Detective Ramirez wasn't what I expected. Young with sharp eyes and surprisingly kind. After asking me a few questions, it became clear that my sister's story didn't add up. She said you threatened to harm her, he explained. But when we pressed for details, she couldn't give us any. Her story kept changing. Of course it did, I said. She's lying. He nodded. It seems that way. Frankly, this seems like a personal vendetta. We're going to close the case, but I wanted to warn you. People like her don't give up easily. You might want to keep your distance. I thanked him and left, feeling a strange mix of relief and anger. My sister had always been manipulative, but this was another level. When I got back to my grandmother's house, she handed me a letter. This came for you while you were out, she said. It was from Mike, my sister's husband. I opened it, confused. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a handwritten note. I need to talk to you. It's important. Call me. I stared at the note, my heart pounding. Why would Mike be reaching out to me? What could be so important? Against my better judgment, I called him. "Thank God," he said when I answered. "I didn't know if you'd even read the letter." "What's going on, Mike?" I asked suspiciously. "It's your sister," he said, his voice strained. She's hiding something. Something big. I didn't know who else to turn to. "What do you mean she's hiding something?" I asked. He hesitated. I don't want to say too much over the phone. Can we meet in person?" I almost said no. After everything my sister had done, the last thing I wanted was to get dragged into more of her mess. But something in Mike's voice made me stop. He sounded desperate. "Fine," I said. "But this better be important." We agreed to meet the next day at a diner outside of town. When I walked in, Mike was already there, looking more stressed than I'd ever seen him. He gestured for me to sit down, and as soon as I did, he leaned in and lowered his voice. "Your sister lied to everyone," he said. "About everything. Tell me something I don't know," I said, rolling my eyes. "I don't just mean the whole thing," he said, his voice urgent. "The mugging, it wasn't random. She planned it." I froze. "What are you talking about?" "She was working with the guy who robbed us," he said. "She gave him the money on purpose. Said it was an investment or something. But I found out she's been draining my accounts too. I think she's in serious debt, and she's trying to cover it up." I stared at him, my mind racing. This wasn't just regular manipulation. This was criminal. "And the police report against you," he added. "That was her way of distracting everyone. She figured if you were in trouble, nobody would look too closely at what she was doing." I leaned back in my chair, trying to take it all in. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I don't know what to do," he admitted. "I can't trust her, and I can't go to your parents. They'll just take her side. You're the only one who sees her for who she really is." For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt towards my sister in a long time: pity. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "But if you want my help, you have to be willing to expose her. No more covering for her." Mike nodded. "I'm ready." But something told me he wasn't. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. The next morning, Mike showed up unannounced at my grandmother's house. He looked pale, like he hadn't slept all night. "I told her I knew everything," he said as soon as I opened the door. "She lost it. Yelled at me, denied it, then admitted it. And now she's threatening to leave, take everything with her." I sighed, already exhausted. "What do you want me to do about it?" "She's dragging your parents into it too," he said. "She's convinced them that I'm the problem. They're on their way over here to talk to me. But I need someone to back me up." I hesitated. This wasn't my problem. I'd spent my whole life cleaning up my sister's messes, and I was finally free of her. But then I thought about Mike, who'd always been decent to me, and about how much my sister had already taken from him. "Fine," I said. "But this is the last time I get involved." When we got to Mike's house, my parents were already there, sitting stiffly on the couch while my sister paced back and forth across the room, talking a mile a minute. She stopped mid-sentence when she saw me. "What is she doing here?" she spat. "I invited her," Mike said firmly. "She has a right to be here." My sister's face turned red, but before she could say anything, I stepped forward. "Let's save the dramatics," I said. "Mike knows about the robbery, he knows about the money you took, and I know about the fake police report." My parents gasped. "What's she talking about?" my mother asked, staring at my sister. "She's lying," my sister said, her voice trembling. "She's just trying to turn you against me." "Enough," Mike said sharply. "I have proof." He pulled a stack of papers from his bag. Bank statements, screenshots of messages, even a copy of the police report she'd filed against me. He laid them on the coffee table, and the room fell silent as my parents read through them. This can't be true," my father said, staring at my sister. "Tell me it's not true." My sister burst into tears, but they weren't tears that inspired sympathy. It was a loud, messy, over-the-top kind of crying, like she was putting on a performance. "I only did it because I was desperate. I didn't want any of this to happen." "You didn't want to get mugged?" I said, crossing my arms. "You didn't want to steal from your husband, or lie to the police?" "Shut up," she screamed, turning on me. "This is all your fault. If you'd just been like I told you, none of this would have happened. I laughed, genuinely amused. Wow, you're actually blaming me for your crimes? Classic. My father stood up, his face pale. We're leaving, he said, taking my mother by the arm. What about her? My mother whispered, looking at my sister. She's not our problem anymore, he said coldly. My sister's jaw dropped. What? You're just going to leave me? You did this to yourself, my father said. I can't help you anymore. For the first time in my life, I watched my parents walk away from her. They walked out of the house without another word, and my sister stood there dumbfounded. When she finally turned to me, her face was filled with rage. Are you happy now? She hissed, her voice dripping with venom. Ecstatic, I replied. And just so you know, if you ever pull something like this again, I won't just walk away. I'll make sure you pay for it. She stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Mike let out a long sigh of relief. Thank you, he said. I don't know what I would have done without you. You would have figured it out, I said. You're stronger than you think. In the weeks that followed, things started to settle. My sister moved out of Mike's house and he filed for divorce. My parents tried to pretend like none of this had happened, but I stopped talking to them. I stayed with my grandmother for a while, saving money until I could get my own place. As for my sister, last I heard she was couch surfing, still trying to dig herself out of the mess she'd created. For the first time in years I felt free. Free from the lies, the manipulation, and the constant chaos. And I knew in my heart that I would never go back. A year later, I was sitting in my new apartment, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise, when my phone buzzed with a text from Mike. Hey, just wanted to thank you again for everything. Hope you're doing well. I smiled and texted back. All good. Hope you are too. For the first time in my life, I wasn't worried about what my sister or my parents were doing. I wasn't looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next disaster. I was finally living my life on my own terms,